Hello, I'm Wendy. Today I'm painting meadow flowers in watercolour and it's a beginner's tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to simplify a pretty busy, complicated scene of flowers like this one in watercolour. It's always difficult because you can't paint the background around these small shapes easily using purely watercolour without putting gouache or body colour on top. I'm going to use masking fluid and I'm going to show you how I built up this picture. I am using this photograph of mine, which were meadow flowers taken a little while ago, just purely because I've always loved this scene and I love these flowers and the colours together. But you could adapt this technique to any sort of photograph you've got of flowers, small flowers in the environment. There could be poppies, anything, spring flowers that you're seeing, bluebells. You could easily adapt this process to any subject of your choosing. I started by doing a light pencil drawing of some of the flowers here. It's up to you how detailed you want to get with this, but I'm a very loose painter, so my style you will see is very loose. You'll know that if you follow my channel. But I do take some care with the composition clearly and try and place the flowers in a nice arrangement there. I am using the masking fluid, and if you are unfamiliar with using it, then I've just done a recent video and I'll put a link to it in the description box, and it goes into quite a lot of detail of how to apply the masking fluid. Basically what you want to do is to use a very good new masking fluid because they do go off. I'm using the PBO gum, and again there's a link to that in the description box, and you want to put it on with a fairly decent brush, and you can rinse your brush off in washing up liquid as you're working to protect it. But I'll go into more detail on that video. You want to make sure that it's not too thick and blobby when you put it on as well, because it won't dry. So this is going on quite thinly and quite loosely, and because of my style I do dot around a bit and put a few sort of extra petals and things in places. I don't have it too tidy. Nature isn't tidy, and that's my excuse anyway. I do like to keep things loose, a little bit busy and a little bit untidy, so I will drop in some sort of random strokes here and there. I'm doing you can see as well, I'm doing the thistle heads sort of singly. I've not put the stalks on things. I will do that later. I will see what it's looking like, and then I'll thread the stalks through for all the flowers and put some grasses in there as well. The stems in this painting are all going to be painted dark, so what I would do if I wanted them light is continue using the masking fluid. I would use a thinner brush. I do like to use a rigger to put the stems on very lightly, and then once you've rubbed the paint off you're going to get these nice light stems standing out. I could have done this for a few of the light grasses actually on this picture, but I decided to keep it very simple and to put everything on later with some darker paint, as you'll see. When the masking fluid was totally dry, I added the background wash. All the time I'm keeping an eye on my reference and deciding what colours to put there. You're never going to do an absolute match of what's in your photograph, and don't worry about that. I think the most important thing is to get a nice warm yellowy colour to go behind. Maybe drop a little bit of light red or a warm little bit of burnt sienna in there, and just look at the colours and try and match them. It's more important really to get the tone here. You don't want it to be too dark. You want this nice light wash behind the flowers. And then here you can see that I am adding a little bit of burnt sienna or light red, just to darken behind the flowers. That's going to be really important, so you can get your lightest light against the darkest dark of the background. And what I do for these paintings is I build up layers. My first layers are going to be wet into wet. So while that background is still wet, I'm looking at the reference and I'm seeing approximately where the greens are coming. and they're sort of in alignment really with the stalks and the flowers. And what I'm trying to do is to leave gaps with the background showing through so that you're not blocking in that whole area. If you look carefully at the photograph, and painting is so much about observation like this, you'll see that that is what is happening. Don't worry about the details. Squint at the photograph and look at the tones that are going on there, and look at the sort of places where the greens are, and keep those light washes showing through. And again here, a little bit darker paint behind the very white areas, so that we're going to end up with the contrast there. Once the background wash was totally dry, then I went in with a darker green to put on the leaves, to suggest some of these leaves that were growing between the flowers. But what I was careful to do when I was doing this, again, was to leave some of the first wash showing, some of that very light warm wash showing, and also leave some of the second wash, the wet into wet wash, showing as well. So we're getting these softer layers coming behind some of these harder strokes that I'm putting on, as you can see, with a little pointed brush. Now your style will be different from my style, and your reference will be different from my reference probably, so you have to look carefully and see where you're going to put these this next layer of leaves on there. Working this way and gradually building up, you can see now that my greens, as I'm doing this, are gradually getting stronger. By building up these layers, then you're getting some depth into the flower painting. It's not just going to be put on in one layer, which is a very illustrative look. And there's nothing wrong with that, clearly, if you're doing illustration. But we're looking for a more painterly, natural look. And I think if you build up these layers of paint like this, then you're going to be sort of getting that nice painterly effect in the end. Your strokes might want to be more considered than mine, and I do work, I know this is speeded up, but I do work quite quickly. This is only ×2. But you want to take your time if that's the way that you work. There's no problem with that. It's just this particular process, I think, will help you when you're doing your flower paintings. So you can see here now I'm building up some of the grasses and some of the stems, using a rigger brush and an even darker green. In this case, the green base would have been Prussian blue rather than the cobalt blue. The previous greens were mixed from cobalt, a yellow, such as cadmium yellow pale or raw sienna. So you're mixing cobalt with a yellow, and then you're adjusting that as well with some sap green, which I quite like because it brightens up the mix. While here I would probably have added a little bit of Prussian blue to the mix, because that will make it a lot darker quite easily. But be very careful with the Prussian. It's a very, very strong colour. You only need a little bit of it. If you don't have any, just experiment a bit and put a bit more of the cobalt in there, possibly a bit of burnt sienna as well. It's colour mixing. It's all about practicing and do some little swabs and some colour swatches before you start if you're in doubt. So you can see here, this is another layer going on. So we've got these layers of paint and painterly marks being built up. Make sure everything is thoroughly dry before removing the masking fluid. Now here I'm using a mask away special rubber for removing masking fluid. I do find that very useful. I'm showing you this process particularly for people who are not familiar with the use of masking fluid, because you can see how really useful it is. The rubber is rubbing the masking fluid off very easily because we're using a good masking fluid and it's been applied correctly. I know some people have awful trouble with masking fluid, but if you do it like this, it works really well. And we're even getting a contrast between the whiteness of the paper and the first washes. So it sort of tells us you don't need to put the green behind all the flowers. You can leave some of them just set off against the pale background. So here I've made a start putting the pinks onto the thistles. This is where the picture really starts coming together, when you're covering up some of these white spaces. I'm starting off with quite a dilute mix, so I'm not finishing each flower as I go along. I'm going to do a little bit of wet into wet work to vary the intensity of the colour. And the colour I'm using for the thistles is Cotman Mauve, which is a really nice pink. By working wet into wet in this way, I think you can get more interesting colours and differences in colours for the thistles, rather than them being one flat colour. And I suggest that just in one or two areas you make some of the flowers a little bit more intense than others. For this picture, I felt the cow parsley really needed very, very little work. I didn't want to start putting any different colours on that white paper. It was working so well. What I did was I just suggested a little bit of shadow colour, as you can see here. A very, very light cobalt blue with maybe a touch of red in it, just to suggest some shadow, and I think that worked well, and I think that was enough to put on there. I used the tiniest little bit of white gouache because I felt, you may have noticed, I got rather a flat dark bit of green underneath one of the flowers, and I just used a tiny little bit of gouache because it was bothering me to adjust that area. So the next stage was putting on the base of the thistles. As you can see here, looking at the photograph, they were quite dark, and I really liked popping these on because it gave another tonal change to the painting and picked out the thistle flowers. For this colour, it was a little bit tricky because it looked sort of purpley and sort of greeny, so I mixed a purple colour with ultramarine and light red, and then just put some sap green in there to knock it back a little bit, making it quite dark. And the final stage of the painting, I just added one or two more grasses in there where I felt it looked a little bit empty, and then did a little bit of splattering. So this is my final painting and my interpretation of the meadow flowers. It's painted with beginners in mind, but you can adjust this process to paint more complicated scenes and to paint them any way you wish in your own style. It's basically a process by which you do some soft washes in the background to start with. You then do another layer or two of your leaves, and then you tackle the flowers which you've previously masked out. And it works very well as a process, but no matter how simple or how complicated your flower painting is. So I do hope that you've picked up some inspiration from my video, picked up some tips on how to tackle some of these paintings using your own photographs, and I do hope that you have got some benefit from it. I've certainly enjoyed painting it.